How's it going, everyone? Today I'm going to be showing you my deck list for a pretty cool new archetype coming from the Temporal Forces set, Tinkaton EX with Dudunsparce. This is the second deck I played on my friend Hitmonchanning's tabletop tournament for the set coming out soon, where a bunch of us played some new, interesting archetypes. So if you're coming from that, welcome. This is the deck list that I played, the exact 60 in that tournament. And if you're seeing this video first, check out the list. I'm going to go over things I liked about the list, maybe some changes I would make, and then you can see the list in action in the link below. So let's get started. First off, we got the Tinkaton line. 4 Tinkatings, of course, as they are basics evolving into our main attacker. I'm playing 170 HP with the rest 60 HP. The 60 HPs feel like they're probably pretty optimal as they only have 1 retreat cost. And they also have a 1 energy collect attack, which you can use in a pinch, or going second, which can be kind of convenient. The thing is they are only 60 HP, so I'm playing this one of Tinkatink as well because it has 70 HP, just in case some situations could come up. Post-rotation, there are things like Medicham and Rapid Strike Inteleon which are gone, but you still might run into like some Sableyes, so you never know. It's not the worst thing to have. Tinkatink can also use Smithereen Smash, which flip a coin of heads discards an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. So in a really tight scenario, you can pray that this hits heads and it could maybe swing things in your favor. So it's not a bad idea to have, I feel like. Then I've got the one Tinkatuff because we are evolving up into a lot of stage 2s. Our stage 2 is our main attacker, so it can help smooth things out through evolution. And then we've got our main attacker, Tinkaton EX. If you don't know what this card does, even though it's not new, it hasn't seen a lot of play. It has the main attack that we're going to be using is Big Hammer for just double colorless. It does 30 for each card in your hand, which is pretty cool because it means it can do infinite damage given a lot of cards in your hand. And then I've also got the one of Tinkaton here, the one prizer, with the Gather Materials ability, which is essentially trade or refinement, but for 3 cards. You discard a card from your hand and then you draw 3. So it's good to have as a potential one prize attacker in a scenario where we want to offset the prize trades. So Special Hammer with a special energy attached, which would be the Neo Upper Energy, would allow it to do 180 on a one prizer. And otherwise it can sit on our bench and act as an extra out to draw power. Then we've got the main engine that kind of makes this deck work. 4 Dunsparce and 4 Dudunsparce. These are new from the Temporal Forces set, which is kind of why this archetype is new overall. The Dunsparce is why we're playing this deck. It has the ability Dashing Draw. Once during your turn, you may draw 3 cards. If you do, you shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your deck. So the main idea of this deck is to set up Tinkatons to attack with and constantly cycle as many Dudunsparce as possible every turn to use Dashing Draw and make a huge hand. And then we've got the 4 Dunsparce, which are actually pretty good. They have free retreat and can also just be moved with the Dunsparce. You can put them up. They act as a pivot because when you use Dashing Draw, they can shuffle, and they just allow you to draw a ton of cards constantly as well. Then we've got Radiant Jirachi and Manaphy, the one of Pokemon in the deck. Manaphy's here because Dunsparces need to be constantly benched, and there is a world where there's a lot of spread damage in the format. Charizard's looking to be the best deck in the format post-rotation, which means Chien-Pao is a pretty good play, and Radiant Greninja can be using that deck pretty easily at a lot of points in the game. So Manaphy's probably good in decks like that that can attack with Ninja because Dunsparces are constantly vulnerable as we're not going to be evolving up all the time. Then the Radiant Jirachi actually is a pretty cool Radiant. You don't see it a lot in decks, but I think it's really good in this deck in particular as we only play mainly double turbo energies, and Jirachi's attack works for a double colorless energy. So you can send it up, potentially attack with Astral Misfortune to pressure your opponent, but it can also just sit there and threaten the Entrusted Wishes ability if your opponent knocks it out, which what happens is when Jirachi gets knocked out, you get to search your deck for any 3 cards. This deck needs to establish a lot of infrastructure to get going at first, so it can be sometimes a little tricky just to pop off turn 2. Your opponent knocking out Radiant Jirachi helps you smooth that out a lot. And if they don't want to knock out Radiant Jirachi, which, they don't really want to give you 3 free cards of your choosing, they have to be wasting supporters to gust around it, or just passing and not taking prize cards, which gives you time either way. So it lets you either get a better setup or slow your opponent down, which is pretty nice. Then we've got our main supporters of the deck, and we're starting off with 4 Nemona. So this deck, you're going to notice with supporters and items are a little bit odd and pretty different from a lot of other meta decks that you'll see. The main reason from that is because of Tinkaton needing to do damage based on cards in hand. We don't want to be playing things that either reset our hand or discard cards like Professor's Research, shuffling supporters like Judge or Iono. Those things really inhibit us, and we just want to be drawing as many cards as possible. So Nemona is actually just draw 3 cards, and it's not a great supporter in most decks, but in this deck it tends to work out pretty well. Then We've got 3 Arzu. This lets us search for 3 evolution Pokemon that don't have a rule box. The main thing this lets us do is constantly get out Dudunsparces, either in the early game or to keep reusing them throughout the mid game. They let us just search out triple Dudunsparce, or we can get Tinkaton or Tinkaton if we need them as sort of a in between. Evolve up to our Tinkaton's easier, find what we need. But the main use is just Arzu, triple Dudunsparce, draw like 9 cards. Pretty good. Then 2 Bosses Order just to chase things down. We have the potential to OHKO in the mid to late game if we're not getting disrupted and we've started to put a lot of infrastructure on the board, amass a huge hand. Or in the early game, if we haven't quite gotten the massive amount of cards we want yet, we can chase down things that we've punched earlier and finish them off. Then I've got a couple of one-of supporters. These ones were a little more niche some in the tournament. I didn't tend to use these a whole lot, so I'll go through my thought process on why I played them and then maybe some of the ones that I wouldn't play or potentially change for some other cards. First off, Cynthia's Ambition. The thought process with this deck was that Iono was really bad, and particularly if your opponent takes a knockout with Iono, drawing into Cynthia off that Iono, or early in your process of drawing, like off your first Dudunsparce before you've gone too deep and gotten a big hand again, Cynthia can let you refresh your hand back to like a starting point of 8 before you've even really done anything, and let you bounce back from an Iono really easily. I didn't actually play it that much though. As a one-of, it's kind of hard to find, and in most cases you're going to be drawing a lot of cards, and if you find it off of drawing a lot of cards, it's already too late as it's not really drawing us many cards anymore, or our hand's too big to even play it. So it's kind of niche. I think it's potentially still good and might require more testing, but it's a card I'd potentially think of cutting. Next, there's quite a few one-of supporters. The next one-of supporter I've got is Miriam. This lets us shuffle back Pokemon into our deck. It's the only form of recovery we have, and it still also has the draw 3 cards effect, so I thought it was kind of nice. It's not a bad card. It's not the best either. You could definitely flex it for some other cards, but because we have some one-ofs, like the one-of One Prize Tinkaton, Jirachi, and Manaphy, if they ever got knocked out and we want to reuse them, or because we only have Tinkaton EX as our main attacker for the most part, happen to prize one gets knocked out, and we're falling short, we don't have a lot of consistent search for evolution Pokemon as well. So if we want to just put them back in the deck and increase our odds of finding them, that's also a good thing. And it's also the only card in this deck that actually lets you shuffle cards back in. Obviously you draw 3, so it's not a perfect, but you can put a whole 5 Pokemon back and then only draw 3. So if you've dug almost too deep and just need to put yourself at like a little bit more of a cushion in the deck so you don't deck out, this is like the only card in the deck that lets you actually put a few cards back in the deck undiscriminately. That is because we have one Roxanne as well. This is the other card that can potentially let you do that, but it is conditional on your opponent having 3 or less prize cards remaining. Roxanne is the only disruption supporter I play in the deck, and the idea here was it might still be good to have some form of disruption against our opponents, and it's also still disrupting our opponents while giving us a starting point of 6 before we start using the Dudunsparces, so it doesn't actually put us that far behind, as opposed to like an Iono in the late game, where we Iono ourselves to only like 1-2 cards, which is pretty bad. This is another supporter that I didn't end up using a lot though, and could be messed around with. Maybe just cut it, maybe we don't need the disruption ourselves, but it can be nice in a situation where we started off slow, prize trade just didn't quite work out for us, our opponent basically has game in hand, and we can just deny that and at least give ourselves a chance to fight through another turn. And then finally I've got Cryptomaniac, or I believe has been recently translated just today as like Cypher Maniac, something like that. Basically a reprint of Mallow, which lets you search your deck for 2 cards, you shuffle the deck, then put those chosen 2 cards on the top of your deck. So you basically get to stack 2 cards on the top of your deck that you're guaranteed to draw into, whether it be on the draw for turn on your next turn, or because we have a lot of easy draw power off the top of our deck, the idea is to stack some good cards on top and then draw them with Dashing Draw or Baby Tinkaton. This card is actually pretty good, and potentially the thing I would replace one of the other one-of supporters like Roxanne or Cynthia for that I didn't tend to use too much. If you want to do that, it's not a card that you want to put like 4 of like in Mono, because it's pretty bad in the early game before you've established a lot of draw power. It's mainly just nice when we only need a couple things, but sometimes we just need to draw a ton of cards and it's not that great in that situation. So you don't want to flood the deck with them, but I think a second one could be a good idea, replacing either Roxanne or Cynthia. Then we go into item search. Starting off with 4 Buddy Pfin. This card is really great in this deck, replacing the VIP passes that we're going to lose in rotation, but they're actually almost entirely just better than VIP pass in this deck, because the only basic that it doesn't get is Radiant Jirachi, which is not a huge drawback, as the main things we're getting out constantly are a bunch of Tinkatanks, bunch of Dunsparces, but the other advantage of this card is it can be played at any point in the game. And because our Dudunsparces shuffle themselves back into the deck, we need constant basic search to reestablish Dunsparces. So we can very easily use a bunch of the Dudunsparces, then get them back out with Buddy Pfin, at least the Dunsparces back out, and then we just need to draw back into the Dudunsparces the next turn. But it lets us execute our loop, essentially, with Dashing Draw a lot easier than like VIP Pass would be, just as a dead card for the rest of the game. Then, a little bit more basic search in the form of Nest Ball. These are just pretty good. We need as much basic search as possible almost in this deck. Obviously, you don't want to go too crazy with it. That's why we're only playing 3, not 4, and 4 of a bunch of other things. But another little bit of basic search is pretty good. Then we move on to some other kind of weirder forms of search that I was talking about when mentioning the supporters. These are sort of the other weird items in this deck. Capturing Aroma and Great Ball. These are search cards that aren't super consistent, but they're ways of getting evolution Pokemon out without having to discard cards through Ultra Ball, since we don't have something like Evolution Incense in the format anymore. If we ever get something like an E-Incense reprint, that card will be really good, but until then, we don't have super consistent evolution search on just a single card drop. So Great Ball and Aroma will kind of have to do. Of course, we still have a ton of draw power in like every single turn of the game to draw into our evolutions naturally as well, so they don't need to constantly be perfect. Then I've got 4 Rare Candy, kind of self-explanatory. When we're playing a bunch of stage 2s, that is our main attacker. We need to get them out as consistently and fast as possible, so 4 Rare Candy just makes sense there. Then I've got a couple Switch. These cards might not seem super necessary at first when you look at Tinkaton being our main attacker that wants to be in the active anyways, and Dunsparce and the Dudunsparce being able to pivot out basically for free. But they can help us avoid some awkward scenarios of Radiant Jirachi and Manaphy being in the active and getting stuck there. Whether it was starting the game with them and we don't really want to waste an attachment for turn, or our opponent's trying to stick them in the late game, because we have so few energy to actually manually attach and retreat, getting just, our Manaphy in the active ever like just once can be kind of detrimental. So the switches let us avoid burning our attachment for turn and our few energy. Then I've got 2 Neona's Backpack. This kind of coincides with why we're playing Neona, particularly as opposed to any other 4 of draw supporter, like draw 3 cards. There's a lot of them, so you might think, why couldn't I just play those? This is the reason why we specifically play Neona. Neona's Backpack lets us actually get 2 Neonas back into our hand, so it lets us recycle just our core draw power on a supporter, and it also lets us net an extra card, as once we have 2 Neona into this card, we play 1 card to get 2 back in our hand, so it's positive card gain, which is what this deck really needs. Then I've got 1 of Countercatcher. We can sometimes struggle to take prizes really quickly in the early game before we've established a couple of our stage 2s, so it can let us fall behind and then still play a gusting effect while maybe needing to also play drawing cards since our damage is decided by the cards in our hand. Maybe we could boss, but then we won't have enough cards. But instead, I get to play something like Neona, draw 3, play Countercatcher, and I've still netted a positive card as opposed to a negative just by playing boss and that's it. Then as stadium bumps, just a couple Artisan, more basic search like I was mentioning, acts as a stadium bump that we don't need too often. A lot of decks aren't playing a ton of stadiums, but it's always good to have 1 or 2 in your deck to bump your opponents and kind of deny the stadium that they want in play, while simultaneously benefiting us to get Dunsparces back out onto the board throughout the game. And finally, 5 energy in the deck. That is it. 4 double turbo and the new Neo upper energy, which acts just as a double rainbow energy basically on stage 2. And that's the deck. The double turbo energies just feed our Tinkaton's pretty low, easy cost of Big Hammer. So we're just trying to draw as many cards as possible, establish some Tinkatons, single attachment for turn, and then bonk our opponents with our Big Hammer while keeping as many cards as possible still in our hand. The deck is pretty cool. It's a really fun archetype to play, so I would 100% recommend you trying it out, maybe at locals or with your friends. I'm not sure if it'll be a super meta deck, as it does kind of fall apart to Constant Iono, which will be a little more popular in most meta decks than maybe it saw in the tournament that we played. However, it's really cool, a lot of fun. I would still recommend you trying it out. If you're excited for Tinkaton and Temporal Forces in general, let me know in the comments. Also, let me know what you think of Tinkaton and the Dudunsparce in particular, what you might change with the deck, what you liked about it. If you did enjoy the video, please subscribe to the channel for more. I'll have the links below for the gameplay of Tinkaton's Round 1 on my friend Hitmonchanning's channel, as well as the Feraligatr deck list video I did, which was the other deck I played in that tournament if you want to check those out. With that said, that's it for me. I hope to see you in the next one. Later.